So today we're going to be solving absolute value equations and absolute value inequalities. This is the actual equation we're going to solve. These are the actual inequalities we're going to solve. And by we, I mean you. I'm going to help you set it up, and then I'm going to have you do it. But first I want to remind you about absolute value. If I was to ask what's the absolute value of 6, the absolute value of 6 is 6. How far away is 6 from 0? It's 6 things away from 0. If I was to say what's the absolute value of negative 6, again the answer would be 6 because it's how far away is this particular number from 0. So there's always two possible things I could plug into my absolute value to get this guy right here. So all of these, for this equation, I'm going to have to plug two numbers, set it equal to two numbers to solve. For this inequality, I'm going to have to set them both equal to two numbers in order to solve them. I'll explain here in a second. So in order to solve absolute value equations or inequalities, the first thing you have to do before you can do anything or before you can think about anything or decide anything, you have to get the absolute value by itself. Just like we've been working on getting y by itself, we're going to get the absolute value by itself. So for my first step, I have to subtract 2 from both sides. Oops, that's a 2. So I end up with the absolute value of 2t minus 3 is equal to 3. So just like I said, there's two things I'm going to be able to plug in to this absolute value in order to get 3. So I always am going to have to solve two either equations or inequalities. The first is going to be the one we actually came up with. 2t minus 3 is equal to 3. I'm going to solve that one. But I also need to solve 2t minus 3 is equal to negative 3. Because if I plug 3 into here, the absolute value of 3 is 3. But if I plug negative 3 into here, the absolute value of negative 3 is also 3. So those are the two equations that you're going to have to solve to get your answers. And I want you to do that on your own. So I want you to solve them and tell me what does t equal. With this guy, again, we have to get the absolute value by itself before we can do anything, before we can think about anything. So I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. And I have negative the absolute value of 3k plus 1 is less than negative 2. Then I'm going to multiply everything by a negative 1 to get rid of my negative, or divide by negative 1, whatever you want to do. So the absolute value of 3k plus 1, there's my absolute value. My sign flips, don't forget that, and I have 2. Okay, so this is where it gets tricky and I always forget these little tricks. This says the absolute value of 3k plus 1 is greater than 2. If you end up with a greater than statement, you're going to write an or statement. So the two inequalities you're going to solve, you're going to have 3k plus 1 is greater than 2, or, because it's greater than, you're going to have 3k plus 1 is less than, flip the sign, and it's negative 2. So one inequality is actually the one that you have, just drop the absolute value, and the other you flip the sign and you make the number a negative 2, and it's an or statement. So when you're graphing that, you're going to be shading out or statement. So I want you to go ahead and solve these two inequalities and graph them. Tell me what k is. I don't want to say equal to because it's not equal to. But k is going to be greater than something, or k is going to be less than something. So go ahead and solve that one as well. Last but certainly not least is this guy. Again, you have to get those absolute values by yourself before you can do anything, before you can write your two equations or inequalities. So we're going to go ahead and do that right quick. So I end up with this. The last one was a greater than statement. This is a less than. And what you do when it's a less than is you make an and statement. Isn't that clever? So greater is or, greater. Less than is and, less than. So an and statement's going to look like this. I always just write this piece first without the absolute value. So I have 2u minus 1 is less than or equal to 3. I'm going to write the exact same sign, but over here I'm going to have negative 3. So it's an and statement. I literally write this right here. I use the exact same sign. I just change this guy to negative. So this is the statement I want you to solve, and I want you to tell me what u is. And then graph it as well, just so you can kind of get an idea. And then we'll go over the rest of this in class. Good luck.